At the end of the 19th century, the guajira flamenca was widely practiced in Cordoba, Spain. It is surprising how many references exist about the preference for this song in all social collectives, ballrooms, celebrations, street music, etc. In episode 13 of the podcast Forgotten Sounds of Flamenco, we will travel to Cordoba at the end of the 19th century to feel how the guajira resounded in every corner.
Sounds that once were listened. Sounds that once were enjoyed. Sounds that once were danced. Sounds relegated to oblivion. And yet, there is still something we can do for them. Let us summon them. Let us summon them.
Welcome to the podcast Forgotten Sounds of Flamenco. My name is José Miguel Hernández Jaramillo, and I invite you to enroll in this journey through the sounds, stories, spaces, and people that were part of the 19th century flamenco. Hi friends, thank you very much for listening to the new episode of this podcast, which I want to dedicate to telling you some stories of the guajira in Spain in the 19th century. But first, I'd like to remind you that this podcast is available on leading podcast platforms such as Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, iVoox, as well as the YouTube channel Sonidos Olvidados Etnomusicología Creativa. When I was doing my doctoral thesis in ethnomusicology at the Faculty of Music of the National Autonomous University of Mexico in Coyoacán, Mexico City, I was amazed at the amount of news about guajiras that I found in the Andalusian city of Cordoba and other towns of its province. Information of all kinds, both performances of professionals singing guajiras as interpretations in salons of rich people, weddings, parties, etc., as well as other references to the guajira in these lands, such as advertisements of the sales of sheet music of guajiras, Cordoban composers composing guajiras, or Cordoban poets writing lyrics of guajiras, for example. In episode 5, I already told you how since the summer of 1878, when we have the first known news of the guajiras in Spain, it is precisely in Cordoba where there is a reference that indicates that it is sung by a flamenco performer, the singer Juan Patrón from Cádiz, also known precisely as El Guajiro. If you remember, the news says as follows: El Guajiro, the applauded singer called this way, who lately pleased a lot in the Café El Recreo, it was said days ago that he had died in Montilla. It was known later that he left safe from that city and he is in Seville with much pleasure from his friend and the fans, who applaud this more than his guajiras. In November of that year, 1878, the sale of flamenco scores for piano, including guajiras, was also announced in Cordoba. I read this ad. In Bataneros Street number 9, in front of Santa Clara, a music teacher goes to homes to give solfeggio, piano, and organ lessons. Pianos are also tuned for monthly payments in advance. There is also arranged for piano everything concerning the Andalusian genre, or as it is commonly called flamenco, such as soleares, guajiras, perteneras, malagueñas, and seguidillas sevillanas, all exceptionally arranged. As I have already commented in previous episodes, traditionally the history of flamenco has only narrated that flamenco that practiced in the 19th century only in 13 subalternized social collectives, or at most in the so-called cafés cantantes. In this episode, we will see how flamenco was practiced and liked by, I would say, all sectors of society, even the elites. As I mentioned before, there are many references that the guajira was one of the favorite songs in the meetings and society events in Cordoban houses and palaces. I will show you some examples, such as this news from 1889 of a meeting in a house of a Don Usano where his daughter Vicenta sang. The gracious Vicenta Usano let herself be heard on the guitar, singing with distinctive flair tangos, guajiras, and malagueñas that we could not occasionally hear because of the applause and the olés. Notice that perhaps the most fashionable flamenco palos at that time, as well as the peteneras, were mentioned. 1 year earlier, Vicenta Usano was singing in a christening celebration in a house of a wealthy family. The chronicle of this Baptist tells us the following. In the midst of the most frank expansion, the hours slipped by until 2 in the morning, and leaving the meeting Doña Vicenta Usano, who sang with her inimitable grace and flamenco style guajiras and sevillana, dancing polkas and rigodones, and then some sevillanas by Pura Soriano and Josefa Ruiz de Fernández. You can see how next to guajiras or sevillana, it is also mentioned that polkas and rigodones are danced. This is an excellent example that the barriers between the so-called ballroom dances and popular music, in this case flamenco, were less marked in the 19th century than we have been always told. We see how people dance what they like, even if they are as different as rigodones or sevillanas. This has always happened, happens now, and will happen. And this is above labels, prejudices, and classism that try to justify something that did not really happen. This same thing can also be seen in a chronicle of another of these parties. The text refers that literally the most selected of the good society of Cordoba attended, and the guajiras were also heard. Let me read this chronicle from 1891. From 9:30 in the evening until the late hours of the morning, many rigodones were danced by numerous couples. We had the opportunity to admire the grace and flair with which the lovely ladies Mariana Pool and Maria Vaquera danced the sevillanas, and we applaud the salt and taste with which she sang the malagueñas and the guajiras, so prevalent in this land, always celebrated for its typical and genuine customs. Notice that there is a reference that the guajiras are very popular in the lands of Cordoba. I also found guajiras sung in other types of settings, for example at the wedding in 1883, where other flamenco songs such as malagueñas, polos or soleá were also performed. Before continuing, let's listen to a guajira of those that could be heard in Cordoba since it is composed by Eduardo Cena. This guajira we are listening to is included in the work Popurrí de Aires Andaluces para Piano, Popurrí of Andalusian Arts for Piano. Like his father Francisco Lucena, Eduardo Lucena was a significant musician and composer in Cordoba in the 19th century, even though he died very young, when he was only 44. Another writer from Córdoba, Guillermo Del Monte Müller, used to publish in the press lyrics of guajira of his authorship. By the way, Guillermo was the son of the well-known pianist in Córdoba, Elisa Müller Stone. In 1901, a newspaper chronicle told us this about him and his guajiras. Guillermo Del Monte Müller is not as well known in Córdoba as he should be because of his excessive modesty. He handles, like no one else, the song called guajira. His compositions of guajiras circulate by word of mouth through Andalusia. And nevertheless, the author's name remains unknown to the people, as always happens with popular poetry. I do not want to finish this episode without referring to one of the most curious news I found about guajiras related to Cordoba. It was published in 1897 in El Comercio de Córdoba and tells how two women used to sing in the streets some guajiras considered at that time as pornographic. I read you this news. Pornography. For some time now, two women have been walking the streets of our town who have dedicated themselves to sing guajiras with pornographic lyrics. We believe that the authorities should prohibit these songs since they offend morals and speak very little in favor of the culture of our people. In a future episode, I will tell you how in the last years of the 19th century and the first decade of the 20th century, this kind of news appears continuously, not only referring to songs' lyrics, but also to the performances of female artists on stage, each time with fewer clothes, which scandalize part of the society of that time. I hope you enjoyed this journey through the lands of Cordoba and this exercise of imagination of what the musical environment should have been like in those years when the guajira was very present. This episode leaves us some elements for reflection. First, how the guajira was practiced and liked very much in Cordoba during those years. Second, from its early years, flamenco was not only limited to subalternized collective, but was also liked and practiced by people belonging to the economics elites. And third, in these rich environments, musical practices were not limited to the so-called ballroom dances such as polkas, mazurkas, rigodones, lanceros or valses. Still flamenco and other music considered popular were also practiced. In this episode, we have seen examples of all of this, so I leave you homework. I let you make these reflections. As always, if you like this episode, subscribe to the podcast to receive notification when new episodes are published. And above all, share it with your contacts. For this kind of independent projects, it is essential to use these small actions that you can do to support them. Have a great time and see you here in 2 weeks.